Wait a minute, I have to hit my acknowledgement there that I accept this. Excellent. Good day, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the NuWorld session. Today is Thursday, I believe it's July 20th, but who's counting? Today we're going to jump into, I've always found this in some of my research, we're going to be talking about some survey work that the Foundry did on digital business maturity. And that whole maturity thing is really, I've always found that in my research to be particularly interesting, because a lot of folks really want to look at, sometimes see, bright shiny objects that are going to change the face and the actual performance of their business. And sometimes we realize, at least in my experiences, if any of us went to the old Disneyland rides, they used to have those little signs there, those little cutouts with probably one of the seven dwarfs at a certain height, right? Said you had to be this big to get on the ride. And I found that a lot of folks that I've worked with ran into that situation, were at that situation and got on the ride anyhow, even though they weren't quite big enough and ready to take on those sorts of capabilities. Now I'm going to be turning a chunk of this over to Rob O'Regan, the esteemed Rob O'Regan from the Foundry. Rob, somebody I've worked with long in the past. He's probably shocked that I'm able to maintain employment at this state. He knew me when I was relatively young. And Rob's one of the leads on kind of the content teams for the Foundry. And this is their digital business survey, the 2023 edition that we're going to walk through, that kind of gives a very good snapshot of a number of industries across kind of the major, and I'll let Rob talk a little bit more about the methodology and respondents, but it's a really great sample of IT leaders and folks who are looking at this panoply of technologies and processes that are being driven by digital technologies, and kind of giving us a great snapshot of where they are in terms of their business maturity relative to some of these technologies. And as I used to do some similar work at my past employer, and we got very, very, I think we got too esoteric sometimes. We create these kind of levels, and I wanted Rob to kind of go describe particularly how they categorize respondents in terms of their business maturity. I am not quite yet, Stuart, but I will be in just a second. Rob, if you could, hopefully that was enough of a kind of an intro, Rob, but please take over at this point. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those AI findings, but if it's okay with you, Rob, let's jump in.
Sure. I just want to mention to everyone that I'm going to put you on mute. When we get to Q&A, we can do that. If you have something important you need to ask, put it into chat or raise your hand, and we'll take it from there. Okay, Rob.
Cool. Thanks, guys. So a little bit about Foundry, who you may or may not be familiar with. You're probably more familiar with IDG, which is what we used to be called. Now we're Foundry. We rebranded a couple of years ago. So we publish a variety of technology websites, CIO, Computer World, Network World, Info World, All the World publications, those types of things. I'm a longtime journalist. That's where Mike and I first crossed paths many eons ago. And I've been on the content marketing side of the media business for about the last 14 years now. So this digital business study that I'm going to be talking about, that Kevin had sent out the links to, it's our fourth annual study that we've done, looking at organizations that are adopting a digital first approach to business processes, to operations, to customer engagement, to their businesses in general. This year's survey, we had about 900 respondents. It's a global survey, so we can do cuts across different regions of the globe. And it's just always a good, insightful study in terms of kind of seeing the progress that organizations are making. And because this is the fourth year that we've been doing it, we wanted to add a new element to it this year, which is that digital maturity index that Mike mentioned. So that's a new part of the study that we've done. We're basically grouping respondents into 4 categories based on the answers they give to some of the questions. So before I get to that, there was just one interesting takeaway from the overall respondent group in terms of kind of what their their objectives for their digital business strategy are currently. And the top two were improving employee productivity and collaboration, which was number one. That jumped up from 44% a year ago to 51% of the respondents this year. And the second one was reducing costs and inefficiencies. So you can see those kind of internally focused objectives from the digital transformation initiatives that organizations are deploying. Certainly a reflection of kind of the current state of the global economy. You know, the impact that COVID had on work models and business performance, et cetera, et cetera. So just wanted to call out that one highlight before we get into the maturity index itself. You know, kind of the jumping off point here was that we know that all digital transformation journeys are not the same. So we wanted to start to dig in a little bit and also be able to track over time kind of that digital maturity, where different organizations are on that adoption and deployment and maturity curve. So we broke it down into 4 different levels of digital adoption. So we'll start from the bottom and go up from there. 14% of the respondents fell into the nascent category. So these laggards face a pretty broad set of hurdles in executing some of these transformation initiatives. The top challenges that they faced were pretty much what you'd expect. And these are kind of big, hairy, you know, blockers to making any kind of progress when it comes to digital transformation. Number one was lack of budget. Number two were gaps in staffing and skill sets. Number 3 were cultural issues. Number 4 was too many competing priorities. And number 5, lack of corporate vision and buy-in. So again, combine all those 2 things together. Any one of them on their own can be a significant inhibitor to making any progress from a digital business standpoint. But you kind of rolled all those up, and you can see why these folks are having trouble getting started on some of these initiatives. The other key thing to point out for this group was that 2/3 of them say that cost savings is a top objective, right? So I mentioned that it's 51% of the overall respondents. 67% of the folks that fall into the nascent category are looking at cost savings. So again, we know that kind of, you know, cutting yourself to growth is never a good strategy, which would also kind of indicates that they may have trouble kind of moving beyond that nascent category. If they're always looking at these digital initiatives as a way to save money, that's really not going to get them to the point where they're investing in growing the business as opposed to just managing the business.
Rob, one thing, this is Mike. Rob, so I think I was particularly noted that the least mature, right, of the sectors, of the segments, that was their number one issue too. And that, to your point, that seems to be antithetical almost, right, to at least, again, we're talking about different generations when I was on the vendor side or the client side, but that was like the last thing, right, that was, we were being responsible, but that always seemed to be in terms of business strategy. Like if you're young and emerging, that seems to be, would you agree, or is that going to be something you guys explore?
If you're always focused on that kind of those internal metrics about how we can do something cheaper or with less people or more, you know, more efficiently than we've been doing things before, it kind of turns your focus to the wrong parts of the business, right? Those things are important, obviously, but you know, on the flip side, for this lowest level of maturity category, just 16% said that customer experience has become more of a priority for them over the last 12 months, right? So again, very internally focused, very focused on cost management and cost cutting. They're not getting what they really need to be getting out of the investments, whatever investments they are making in digital technologies.
Cool. Didn't mean to interrupt. I hope you
don't
don't
mind.
mind.
That's good. It's a really important point. And again, not just a technology issue with these companies, right? It's really about culture and mindset, that they don't get the top level support that they need to kind of, you know, make strategic bets on some of these investments. And there's probably a lot of just, you know, legacy thinking in terms of why are we doing things differently, those types of things. Those are all big inhibitors in terms of starting to get more out of your investments. The next category up, we flagged as emerging. About 1/3 of the respondents fell into that category. not as much in this extent, but still very focused on cost cutting and productivity rather than more growth oriented goals like improving business agility and improving customer experience. These companies also tend to lag well behind the folks at the top end of the maturity scale in terms of investing in core digital technologies like analytics and 5G and mobile technologies. One interesting aspect that runs a little counter to that is that more than a third said they're actively researching or piloting AI and machine learning with an eye toward deploying those technologies over the next 12 months. So if they follow through on those pilots and the research that they're doing, that's one way some of those folks can close the gap quickly with some of their more advanced peers. So that's kind of a ray of hope for them in terms of starting to increase their capabilities at a little bit more of a rapid pace. The next group up is the established group, right? So that's about another third of the respondents that we found. They have a much more balanced set of objectives for their digital investments than some of the folks on the bottom end of the scale, focusing on both cost management but also growth initiatives. More than 3/4 of those folks said customer experience was becoming more of a priority for them. And they also said they're committed to continue investing in digital strategy despite whatever economic headwinds they might be facing as a business right now. So again, being able to justify the importance of continuing to make these investments because it's critical to the growth of our company, that's a good sign that they're starting to figure it out a little bit.
Right.
And also interesting there, about 7 in 10 said that they felt their organization was further along on their digital business journey than they might have expected a couple years ago. One of the things that one of the main challenges that this group is facing is the complexity of the IT infrastructure, right? So they've got the kind of the foundational components in place. They've been investing in areas they think are important. And now it's a question of stepping back and saying, oh, okay, we've got all these cloud investments we've made. We're doing all this as a service stuff. We've got all these kind of pockets of innovation and investment going on. Now we need to really figure out how all this stuff starts to integrate together. We've got this big sprawling IT landscape now.
Right.
How do we start pulling some of those pieces together to get some of the benefits, that kind of step up the benefits that we are getting right now. That's where a lot of the innovation and insights happen, is when you start integrating all those disparate pieces together. Mike, you had a comment there?
Yeah, no, I was just, it's, as you looked at that, the challenges that they face, it's interesting because I think that to some degree for folks like me, and my positions and the folks on the call, I think at least as I was reading through this and as you were going through this just now, it really underscores that a big chunk of the value that what we can do and kind of in the way many of us work is kind of attacking that thing that you're describing right there, which is there's still a whole lot more assistance and help we can provide in just getting people to stop. And as Kevin, kind of anchors a lot of this whole practice in this federation is, are you really asking the right questions? Is that when you say those are obstacles, well, is that really an obstacle you're facing, or are you not doing as the IT leader enough of a job, a better job of asking yourself better questions and making sure that your executives are asking better questions?
Yep.
And Brig, one thing I may have missed it, it's what Rob, and this is kind of important, I think, for the rest of the crowd, is a lot of these were IT decision makers, yeah?
It's a mix of IT. It's primarily IT decision makers, but it's also business side decision makers as well. It's people who have influence over the technology buying decisions at their organization. So there is a component of business decision makers that fall into that category as well.
And Mark Prensky is asking whether
our audience is primarily the IT decision maker.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Mark Prensky is asking whether this is a global or U.S. slice of reality.
Global. I think it was about 60% of the respondents were North America, but the rest were were across APAC and EMEA.
Yeah, it was like 20%, I think, and then Asia Pac was about 22% of that total.
Yep.
There are some, just to get Kyle, answer Kyle's question. Kyle, we were, as you can see, looking at us, what better way to start your day than just looking at our faces? There are some some slide data available on that link that you'll follow that Kevin provided if you want to see some of the sample slides that they have up there, but we didn't generate a lot of slides for this one.
Okay. There's no link in the chat because I joined a little late, so I must have missed that.
It's in your email.
Got it.
If you look in email, there'll be a link that goes to the whole survey.
Great.
Yeah, and if you don't feel like filling out a reg form on our website, just let me know and I'll send you.
Okay. I appreciate it, Rob.
By the way, reg site, Rob, got my confirmation some time ago, and I got the name of your VP of marketing, which means I'm sure a local sales rep will be calling me soon.
Yeah, you can expect a few follow-up phone calls as well.
Keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So the last group, the advanced group. So about 16% of the respondents fell into that category, right? So there were some definite things that these folks are doing that put them well ahead of their peers in the other groups. They're more likely to prioritize business agility, customer experience, security improvements, and importantly, revenue driving innovation as key objectives of their digital business strategy. They're more likely to be continuing investments in that strategy, regardless of economic indicators. They're more likely to adopt or have adopted a remote first mindset when it comes to making technology purchases. So again, reflective of the changing world of work that we're all experiencing right now. The majority of this group are increasing spending in key technology areas like analytics and AI and 5G. And they're also more likely to be investing new money in emerging technologies, cloud native platforms, AI engineering, Gen AI, security mesh technologies, those types of things. So they're doubling down on the things that they've already found success with, but they're also constantly kind of looking out on the horizon to see what's coming next and trying to get an early start on some of those newer technologies that are coming down the pike. Some of the challenges, again, to the point that Mike was making, it really reflects how deep these organizations are into the details of optimizing their digital investments, right? IT complexity was one, as it was with the other group. Data collection, management, and analysis was another one. Integrating new applications with legacy systems was the third biggest challenge. So you can see the trend line starting to develop there, right? Where it's really about the execution as opposed to the initial deployments, right? So they're really kind of working with down in the weeds now in terms of, okay, we've got all this great new stuff that we've deployed. How do we start to get more out of it? How do we build that data infrastructure? How do we start to integrate all those different pieces of the environment so we can start getting better insights from all the data that we're collecting? How are we integrating these different departments together? How are we continuing to look at our legacy systems and how they fit in with some of these newer deployments that we're making? So it's really about the how of the execution as opposed to the why, which some of the folks at the lower end of the maturity scale are still going through. So just to wrap up, again, from a marketing standpoint, we advise our clients in terms of how to approach some of these different groups. It's really about first identifying kind of where they are on their journeys, and then crafting your messaging around that, right? So for those laggards at the front end, there is still a lot of education that takes place around kind of why we need to be doing this. How do we justify this? How do we get leadership buy-in on some of these investments we want to make? On the other end of the spectrum, it's really about giving them, the specific resources and best practices and details and reference frameworks and things like that around how do you get more out of these deployments? How do you integrate all these systems together? How do you reduce some of the complexity that you've created through all these new investments across the IT landscape? So those types of things. So there's a lot of, kind of subtle messaging and not necessarily personalization, but some customization of the messaging based on where some of these organizations are on their transformation journeys. So That's the high level summary. I'm happy to.
Yeah, Rob, there was a couple of
I really
AI
want-
things. Did you want me to talk
Yeah,
through some
please
of
do.
those?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was, fascinating because this was an area around AI and marketing that kind of a little more narrower focused than that what you guys surveyed on. That was something I did look at when I was in my previous employer, and that it was fascinating. It was and that was 2.5 years ago when the survey I worked on was fielded. And so 4 months later we had this stuff out. Very similar respondents, but what I see here in this is, as I think many of us would expect across that total sample size that Rob's teams worked with on that survey, 84% were at least investigating, right? And not, I think, unexpectedly, the more mature the organization, the leaders, the advanced folks, obviously perhaps a few more, a little bit further down the road. I think it was about 16% of the sample had already had AI and machine learning. And I think that was another important thing, Rob, to point out in that around the AI and machine learning was calling out and differentiating the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? Because I think many of us know a lot of the advanced stats and analytics programs, and even something as very large and sometimes inefficient as, say, the Salesforce Marketing Cloud had, or Oracle, and Adobe, all their clouds, had elements of what they often used the term AI publicly, and really what they were really leveraging was machine learning,
Right.
which is a very crucial kind of, maybe let's call it subset. An architect might disagree with me, of machine learning. And so I think it was important you guys called that out and separated that, because I think what I was running into, and I think a lot of us will run into this as we deal with folks at companies, is they'll often use those terms interchangeably. And, you want to make a data scientist cringe, do that. Use those terms interchangeably. And I think it's particularly important because there's so much benefit companies can get from just really understanding, utilizing machine learning before they decide to go all the way up to Salesforce's Einstein or whatever. And what we saw across, what Rob's team found there, I think was really interesting, in that, first of all, with their the IDC arm of, is that in Foundry is, I think great estimate, $10 trillion worth of impact by 2033. And that talks about new revenue opportunities as well as lowered expenses, a key requirement or need that a lot of those survey respondents highlighted. And I think those are, and improved productivity, which I think is very consistent when you look at some of these surveys in terms of what people expect or hope to get out of these things. But I think, and I think, as far as the kind of the various flavors of or applications of AI and machine learning, it was quite clear that generative AI, at least what I could see, Rob, in the survey when I read through it, is that was where most of the respondents were particularly focused, was around generative AI, not some of the more kind of arcane applications.
Yeah, and to that point, and to answer Kevin's question as well, when this survey was fielded, it kind of predated the huge hype that has been generated around Gen AI. So while it was included in there as a pick list item on one of the questions, right, we really didn't drill down on it. We do have another survey that I think is just going into the field now, that is looking specifically at Gen AI and how organizations are starting to deploy that, or at least think about how they need to deploy it across the business.
Do you have any anecdotal view of shift of resources that's taking place between the time you fielded this survey and what's kind of happening now in terms of inquiries?
From an inquiry and interest perspective, it's a huge shift, right? We don't know if the actual resources are following yet, but it really has kind of taken over the AI conversation at this point, at least from what we're seeing. So, and a lot of that is top-down driven. It's the leadership seeing the headlines on it and saying, "Hey, what are we doing? What's our Gen AI story?" Right? So there's a huge amount. Like, again, this is an industry known for its hype. I don't recall seeing anything that's kind of been hyped as much as this has in the past decade or so. So
yeah, it's crazy. Do you think it's overhyped or underhyped?
That's a good question. I don't, yeah.
What's the over under, Rob?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I would have to say it's overhyped just based on kind of the, you know, the folks that are asking the questions, right? It's
Oh,
everybody.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, in terms of potential, we may just be just scratching the surface here in terms of how we actually might be able to deploy some of these technologies and learning about what they might actually do for different parts of the business.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Rob,
oh, go ahead.
no, please go ahead.
Nope.
Mac?
I'm a
go ahead.
co-host. Matt, go ahead.
Rob, some of us have reflected, right or wrong, that over the past decade, coming out of the financial crisis, we saw visionary leadership disappear
Mhm.
in many companies in favor of cost pragmatists, people who could manage the bottom line, but not necessarily the top line.
Right.
When you look at the results of that data, and profitability isn't necessarily a good measure, because you can be amazingly profitable using a cost management approach
Sure.
until you're not.
Right.
Are there other characteristics, and I haven't had a chance to read the report, that separate those companies in terms of, here are the firms that are not resisting this, but just see it as an expense and eventually maybe competitively weeded out, versus those that are taking the thoughtful risk of investing in these technologies? How else could we characterize them?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, there's you know, kind of indicators in terms of the research that, you know, that I pulled out some of those points that where the organizations where they're focused on, we're not getting leadership buy-in, or we're having trouble justifying these investments. You can see that direct connection, or start to see that a more direct connection between how their business is performing, right? So there's definitely a factor there that starts with that kind of leadership vision for the company, regardless of how you're using digital technologies to get to achieve that vision. If your leadership team is more focused on profitability and cost management and things like that, it's a easy jump to make to say that these folks are not going to be growing as consistently and as sustainably as some of the other organizations.
Thank you.
And I think Mark is asking, noted a question like when to jump in, Rob. And I think Mark, I think that's a question we could kind of spend, well, we'll probably spend some time here and probably a lot of time in the future on that, because I think that's what's a lot of us are going to run into is what do we tell our client? I think it's hard. I don't think I could ever give advice to an entity not to be experimenting, at least with Chat GPT, to a degree. Now, I think, Rob, one thing that is, I was going to ask you is, as far as going forward, well, to get to Mark's question, did you get a sense from the respondents that they had established some sort of an evaluation model or some sort of construct to say, we'll start here, or we'll start when this thing happens, or Y develops over here? Was there anything between like their internal maturity and the external world that said, these are the signals for us to invest? Because the survey indicates that across all of those segments, they're all at least investigating.
Right.
Yeah.
Nothing specific to that question in this particular study, but again, anecdotally from some of the other studies we've done, from a lot of the clients that we work with, from the coverage from our editorial team on the websites that we see. It's really about having that infrastructure in place that encourages that experimentation, right? And a very disciplined process around how you vet some of these technologies, right? So the short answer to the question is that, to your point, Mike, you should be experimenting on all this stuff now in some way, shape, or form, right? But you need to have a process and a workflow and a discipline built around it for you to kind of, okay, how do we organize this in a smart way? How do we measure the progress that we're making, where we say, okay, we're at a point now where we've done a proof of concept or whatever, and now we see the benefits of it. So now we need to start investing more in it. So there is the companies that do this well have a pretty good infrastructure and culture in place to encourage that experimentation, to be able to do it efficiently, so you're not taking valuable resources away from all the day-to-day stuff that you still need to be doing, and just having that kind of that culture of innovation where you're constantly testing new ideas and have a trackable way of seeing those ideas through to fruition and based on kind of what's proving to be most valuable.
Rob, do you get a sense that there's, I'm going to guess that the advanced and even emerging maybe segments probably have that in place, something like that in place, and it's hopefully like a multidisciplinary team, right?
Yeah.
IT, CTO, risk, legal, marketing, et cetera.
It's definitely not just IT. It's got to involve the business side as well. So
cool. And I think one last couple things on the AI data points, and then we can get kind of into keep going the conversation going. I think I've hit the high points, Rob. It was interesting to note though that kind of competing, especially with both for actually across the board, but particularly with the nascents and the advanced, was right behind AI and ML kind of investments and research, AR and VR, right? They kind of grouped together with AR and 5G. I wanted to ask you one thing about the survey. When you said 5G was the big thing, was that kind of a catch-all for mobile, or in terms of their mobile capabilities? Because I was trying, or is it reflective of they see 5G as being transformational somewhere, somehow? That was one thing I was curious about, is the 5G.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that. I think it was split out into different.
Yeah, folks, just in the survey, it notes that among the other leading kind of emerging technologies that companies are investing in or investigating and researching was 5G, because I think what everybody thinks, no latencies, like the big headline for 5G, denser deployment of cells, so you can get better mesh kind of like coverage, being able to slice parts of frequencies and dedicate those to it, all very cool. But I think I was just curious how we were seeing that, and I apologize, Rob, I couldn't find that data point when I was looking, that kind of jumped out at me, which was probably my fault. But
now, there was one question that's specifically asked about 5G, and that was again more in the category of what emerging technologies are you starting to experiment with or starting to deploy, and then there was another question that asked in terms of currently in use, and so mobile was kind of a catch-all category for mobile apps and mobile devices. Those were called out separately. So two different types of questions in terms of stuff that you're already deploying and using to drive your digital business. So mobile apps, mobile devices are going to score well there, right? Because
sure, exactly.
But the second question was a bit more forward-looking in terms of what are some of the newer things that you're thinking about, and 5G is definitely kind of increasing in terms of the interest levels across the CIOs of the world, in terms of we need to start figuring out, again, from an infrastructure standpoint, how all of this new digital technology that we're introducing into the organization, how it's going to flow, how it's going to connect together, making sure that people in our newly distributed workforce all have similar capabilities in terms of accessing the information they need to get their work done. So 5G has kind of risen in prominence in terms of, hey, there's a solution to a problem out there that we haven't really been thinking about too much.
Well, I was thinking, Rob, to me, because as you were saying that, and I did kind of read through some of that, but I'll try to piece it together. But the first thought I had was, I think the notion of any employee bringing their own piece of hardware, their own smartphone in, and just getting the company image on their device, I don't think that's going to happen anymore. That's always been a flexible thing most companies allow. But I think when you think about the fact of the capabilities of 5G, and to your point, wanting to make sure that anybody in my company, whatever country they're in, has access to the most advanced capability with their smartphones, plus the fact that you can run something like Chat GPT on an iPhone now, means that I think we're probably going to see the days of, the user bringing their own device into the enterprise. That ain't going to happen anymore. I think because of those things, that I think and so I think that was, an observation I had. I think that I think is going to be particularly interesting. I think because I think this links back to a point I noted in here that it struck me in the data, is that it appears we're seeing higher levels of responses from the respondents in EMEA about their investments in AI and machine learning. Likewise, I noted it in that survey I did a couple of years ago. They're also, and I think part of this is they've been more willing to jump in and invest, not because they saw the signals earlier. It was because of, frankly, all the EU privacy directives, the GR, et cetera.
Yeah,
they had most of those enterprises and their companies had their customer data pretty well secure, and they had big policies around it, and they actually didn't just kind of adhere to the letter. They also adhered to the spirit. They've continually updated that, and they're cognizant of what they can and can't do with that customer data. So therefore, they're more willing to do that. Whereas I've noted in a lot of that a lot of U.S. companies are, they're investigating, they're doing some early investment, but when we asked them, like, what were their concerns, it was that they did not understand or couldn't figure out exactly or game out what would happen, in terms of their ability to ensure that they were not, using customer data improperly. And I think that was, one of the key policy things I've seen come out recently, from our research and a few other places, is getting and using some of these advanced technologies is great. That's great promise. But if you haven't figured out your own internal customer data and how you secure that, how you can anonymize and use and hash and use it usefully, you're going to be a lot more reticent to start dumping that or using that. Kevin was, has written about this, I think, a couple of posts, and others and we've discussed this, is if you haven't figured out that policy around how you're using customer data, this is going to be you're going to be running right off the cliff like Wile E. Coyote. And do you see that as a possible thing you guys might be looking at in future surveys? Right, it's kind of the policy type things around these advanced technologies.
Yeah, it's very possible. We touch on that, I think, in some of the other studies we do. We do a data and analytics study, or at least we have done in the past. I don't know where we are with kind of renewing that for this time around, but yeah, those governance questions are increasingly important in terms of kind of how you're managing all of that information you're collecting, not just from a customer privacy standpoint, but just from a making the data useful standpoint, right? For your internal use, right? How you're integrating all of that data, how you're applying AI and machine learning to it so you can extract better insights from it. How you get to that place where you're, the nirvana of having one view of all the data in your organization that everybody works off of, instead of everybody doing their own little siloed implementations of data and basing their decision making off of that particular slice. So we're still a long way from that, but that's where businesses need to get to.
Okay, I'm going to do co-host prerogative 1 second, Rob. As you know, Rob, I have a short attention span. We're going to call on Doug. He's got his hand up, or he's a representative for Body Glove Wetsuits. And I will note that I'm not sure who that is, but I'm pretty sure I can guess who that surfer is on the way behind there. But please go ahead, Doug. Your question.
Mark's got a bunch of questions too, so we want to get him into the mix as well.
Yeah, I like to wake surf, so that's why, and I go by Surfer Doug as my avatar. So I was with Motorola and Nokia for 33 years. Worked on business development strategy, did from everything from 1G to 5G, and actually gave my first 6G presentation in 2020.
That's right.
Yeah, so one comment is, like, right now it's estimated there will be about $13 trillion of economic development by 2035 for 5G. 6G will turn on around 2030. So just like an AI, actually, if you look, there's the same charge from McKinsey and everyone. It's like $15 trillion from AI, 13 trillion from 5G and so forth. A lot of this is probably duplicate amplification as well. I would say there's, and I'll try to find it before the call is ended, but Microsoft, they have a how to prepare for Microsoft Graph and Office 365 Copilot. That I thought was really good, preparing for that. Google Workplace has their Duet coming out as well. So how companies manage their data, their knowledge graph information, security is absolutely critical. One of my fears to, when I talk to clients is that they're, it's like, oh, throw all this data at the AI and they'll give me all these great things. But, you're opening up to your kimono to, hacks and, all the bad things that could happen. So you need to really manage your data, know who owns the data, who has control, who has access to the data. So like I said, there's this really good on how does Microsoft prepare for that. Microsoft has announced that they're planning on doing Office 365 Copilot rollout to the general E3 community come November. I mean, right now they had 20 companies working on it, then they went to 600, and then November. So that would be my one comment, is knowing how to prepare for all the data with AI is going to be absolutely critical.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Doug. And I recall my notes from, I was just looking at my notes from that 6G presentation you gave. I think we're going to have to revisit that in a future call. Mark, you've had a couple things in there, and I think the one I find particularly interesting, and this, Rob, I think it's something we might want to jump on. When you talk about market, if you'd ask Mark if this kind of approach or this kind of examining of these technologies like AI, is that better left to a skunk works? Is that, am I reading the question properly?
Right. Yeah, that a lot of the times, especially when somebody mentioned you need a team that comes from legal and upper management and all that. Yes, when you said that, that sounds like it needs something special to adapt, especially in a company. And I don't know what size scale we're talking about here, but if we're talking about the biggest scale, it's very hard to do this stuff in the course of business development. So a lot of companies that I heard about have found that if you put this in some kind of a skunk works and develop internally, but that goes along with the other question that I had, is how much is this stuff going to be proprietary to each company? And so and that also argues perhaps for a skunk works, but it also argues for a more difficult dissemination.
Right. So yeah, I think a lot of it is driven by kind of the culture in your organization, right? So if you have that culture that encourages experimentation, that encourages, looking for new ways to innovate around parts of the business, then you may find that it's less likely that they would have to set up some type of walled off skunkworks operation to do this stuff away from the day-to-day business. But if you're in an organization that is really kind of not seeing the benefits of doing these types of things, then keeping it focused around that type of skunkworks operation to vet some of that stuff internally first, that you see more organizations kind of focusing on that. If they're not getting the support they need from the leadership side of the business. So in terms of the proprietary piece of that, I think that's where some of the competitive differentiation is going to take place, right? You can't just look to Google and Microsoft and AWS and those types of companies to kind of house your AI skill set for you, or your capabilities, or your data, right? The real benefits of things like Gen AI are going to be tuning it and modeling it around your proprietary data that you have, whether that's your customer data or your financial data or whatever it is, right? And finding new ways and new insights from that proprietary data set that you have. So that's where the proprietary piece comes in from what we've been seeing.
Thank you.
Does that answer the
I would-
question?
Yeah, and I would add on to that, Mark. I mean,
Yes,
I've
thank
seen
you. very much.
some of the, oh, sorry, Mark, one thing I would add on to that is, that notion of the trying to have a, as I posited earlier, multidisciplinary, different departments involved. You're right, it doesn't scale up. But what I've seen is because of, particularly in the areas around marketing and sales, the concerns around customer data, what I've seen, and we've seen shown in some surveys in the past, was when the C-suite says, we need this, we need these capabilities for our company, they really are frequently asking for or requiring that, yes, IT and tech, the CTO, if that's a role in the company, drive that, but they're required and demanding that other departments maybe have the advisory or consultative kind of role in that, because they have seen that. And in my experience, it's been because they're mostly concerned about what happens to the to the customer data, as well as the company's IP, its financials. They just don't want, the junior intern dumping, a gigabytes worth of, financial information into the system. But I think, to your point, you're right. It's how do you manage the agility in a very large enterprise to focus on these kind of innovations is hard. But I've seen, but I've also seen where departments where there is no centralized, or at least somebody governing that process, where one department goes out and starts moving data into one of these AI engines, or, some other piece of technology, and it can cause some pretty significant concerns. But I think whether we make that a large enterprise or this notion of the pure skunk works, it should be happening. I think some of the more advanced companies I work with do have groups that investigate technologies, and they do it regularly. But I've found, and Rob, I don't know if this is in your experience anecdotally, it's usually because they have a separate, like MarTech, for example, or sales tech kind of team that oversees the technologies those units use, or these companies' investments tend to be a little bit more agile and a little more effective if they have those kind of folks who are there, who have both the business experience of, say, of sales and marketing, but also have, a deep technology background.
Yeah, that's the key, whether you do that as a separate group, or whether it's just the collaboration that needs to take place between IT and marketing, or IT and finance, or IT and HR, right? You need to match up those business requirements and business needs with the solutions that help you get to where you need to be, right? It's not just IT figuring out how to do all this stuff on their own.
Correct. I was noticing, Ben, you raised a great point about proprietary is not 0 and 1. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Well, I just think our discussion often is too much about private or shareable. And there are points in between and context of use that we lose when it starts with the poor premise of trying to think of these as monolithic singular knowledge bases, and everything's a garbage pile we're throwing things into, and that I'm exposing my private data. And I think that's why I made the comment about the walled gardens too. We need to start by thinking about how we chunk data into relevant chunks, as our brains do. Our brains don't have one monolithic assemblage, and that it is in fact a distributed system that has generative adversarial practice, and our system architectures need to go back to that. We keep pursuing an illusion of brain instead of a reality of brain, and I think there's more. Nature informs quite well, and we're not representing that, and
Okay.
I can't have that information as proprietary and closely held safely. Other than that, I have no opinion.
Doug, well, those I agree, Ben. I think part of this is, how do we maintain that kind of a link over time, right? So that, we don't want it to be kind of slavishly focused on this one element to the exclusion of the other. And I think that's why, you know, I think as we try to maintain that balance, that's why I think more voices early on in kind of the establishing the ground rules for what we do as a company, I think are particularly important. And I think oftentimes I've seen, and I don't know, Rob, if you agree, sometimes it's just the most charismatic, maybe not the most powerful executive, but the most charismatic individual, whether they're an IT or another unit, can sometimes drive all the focus through their perspective. And I think that's why what I was saying to Mark is that idea of being able to have not everybody in the company, but multiple voices involved early on, I think is particularly important as they establish the rules. And I want to jump to one last, we got a few minutes left. Doug, you raised the point of like, does it make any sense for a company to kind of take the DIY approach with LLMs? And you have a nice response in there. I'll ask you to kind of do a little back and forth with Rob and I here. I guess you talk about it, especially if it's a particularly narrow focus. And the thing that kind of came to my mind is, I don't know why I went to medical, but I went to, medical device manufacturers or something like that, right? Is using, I think, some of the graphical or visual tools. Is that where you're describing? Is there, some open source stuff I can go get to cobble together a solution that allows me to do, in 3 dimensions in a CAD drawing of an artificial joint, do what ifs or things like that? Am I creating a reasonable facsimile of your scenario, or have I gone off the rails?
Yeah, I mean, I was responding to what Mark, he was asking about big companies will be proprietary with their technology. And I had responded to another company about comparison do it yourself, right? Or your internal large language model, right? And training and everything. Or do you take, a Copilot from Microsoft or a Duet from Google or whoever, right? Or a Lambda 2 or Llama 2 or whoever. Anyway,
the guy from Motorola just froze up. Doug, we lost you.
Time for a 5G upgrade, clearly.
I was just going to say something about that.
Go 6G, Doug.
Next.
Okay, we'll wait for Doug to come back. But I think, Rob, I was curious. I don't think we got to this yet. It was an area I'm particularly interested. Do you see with some of the 4 things going forward about, the kind of, and correct me if I've already asked this question, ethics, morality, the ethics around data usage and things like that. Do you see that as something that's of concern to the crowd, or something you might be kind of driving into the next round of surveys?
Definitely a concern, right? We're already seeing some blowback on that in terms of how, people or organizations are starting to misuse some of this data or misinterpret it based on the results that they're getting from some of these Gen AI experiments. And you can see Google and Microsoft and others trying to take steps to get ahead of that as well. Google's been talking a lot about responsible AI. So that's going to be a key part of at least their marketing messaging. We'll see how it is in terms of how they actually use some of these tools and technologies that they're developing in-house and sharing with their customers as well. But it's a huge issue going forward for sure.
Rob, I'm laughing because for Google to say that after they shotgun the person they put in charge of their ethics and AI a year and a half ago is pretty rich.
There's some hard questions coming around, that how we're using that data, how the models are using the data without human intervention, those types of things. So there's a lot of shit to work through still. Pardon my.
Exactly. Doug, you're back.
Also some interesting stuff going on in terms of the large language models rereading what they've generated in the past and kind of corrupting, right, the way that they respond, right? So that's becoming interesting. Doug, back to you.
Yeah, in fact, I think one of the things that's going to be a challenge to going from just dumping a whole bunch of learning data in and getting results to being very narrowly focused, like MedPalm, from Google is very focused on the data that they're being trained on, to have fewer hallucinations. So, that's, I think what they're going to be looking at is like, how do I maximize the information so I get minimize the hallucinations, making it honest, helpful, and helpful, and seeing those technology, especially around medicine. But yeah, 30% of data of the internet is medical data. What is about the 50 or 60 zettabytes of data out there is medical data. So, this is ripe for, having AI to look at it, to, help solve the 13,000 ways the body can fail. So, I'm really hopeful that AI will, and they're doing some things. In fact, there was recently a podcast that was excellent, saying that they're using AI for drug discovery, that is just going to be revolutionary. So, email me if you want if you're interested in this topic, and I can send you some material on this. I just put that in the chat.
Oh, thanks, Doug. No, that'd be great. I think it's interesting. I've been tracking, there's I don't know I can't remember the category name of what a Y Combinator is, right? The new name for where venture capitalists make their portfolio companies go. But there's one that's particularly focused on funding companies for research around how to use things like psilocybin, MDMA, et cetera, as therapeutic tools. And one of the things that was called out at this recent, they had, whatever they do at those combinators where they have the contest, the portfolio companies present, and everybody goes, you win. Which means you get money, and that means the VCs will now nag you. But that's one of the key differentiators from the VC or investor side is, how are their plans? Are they currently, or will they be how are they going to leverage some of the AI, the engines to do what you're saying? Not in place of testing, but can you just find new combinations of elements that can deliver these therapeutic tools.
Yeah, there's an organization called Chasing the Cure, a doctor who had Castleman's disease, and he died like 5 times. And so he was a med student at the time. And he's looking at taking existing medication that's been already FDA approved and repurposing it to cure the way, especially these rare diseases.
Cool.
Hey guys, I got to jump to another call, but I appreciate you giving me some time today.
Rob,
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah.
you're the best. Thank you, man. Much appreciated.
Hit me up with any follow-up questions. Happy to chat offline about any of this stuff.
Oh, don't worry. I'll be bugging you. We'll be throwing some your way.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Folks, thank you very much. Hopefully this was an enjoyable session for you. It was, Rob's one of my favorite people, and I'm really glad he's been able to kind of join some of our calls. Kevin, what's up for our next session?
Next, we've got Mike Wing, and Mike is going to be talking about the ways that you apply digital technology for grassroots involvement. So we're looking forward to having Mike on that call. He is the person who helped invent W3, which was the internal communication system at IBM. It was one of the only ones that I know of that actually, pioneered intranet, right, for employee use. And it actually became something that IBM sold to other companies. And then the JAMS, which is being used as a form of that's being used in treasure hunt and platform UX today. So Mike's fascinating, and we're delighted to have him up next a week from today.
Cool. Well, I think we'll bring this to a close. Thanks everybody for joining. Unless there's any other housekeeping, new business people want to bring up. Everybody good?
All right.
Excellent. Thanks everybody.
Thanks,
We'll
Mike.
chat again soon. Take care.
Cheers.